Okay, so let's dive into one of America's most fascinating, complex, and honestly, just dynamic presidents, Theodore Roosevelt. You see, he was a real force in nature, a man just full of contradictions, and someone whose legacy we're still trying to figure out today.
And this famous phrase right here, it really captures the whole puzzle we're about to explore. On the one hand, you've got these carefully measured words, but on the other, you've got this readiness for decisive, overwhelming action. It's the core of his philosophy.
All right, to really get to the heart of who TR was, we're going to look at his life through 5 different lenses, from his personal struggles and presidential policies to his, well, complicated relationship with the world.
So first up, let's look at how Roosevelt's own personal battles didn't just shape him as a person. They literally forged his entire philosophy on life and, of course, leadership.
You know, it's really hard to imagine the rugged, Rough Rider as a frail little boy, but his youth was completely defined by poor health. We're talking terrifying, life-threatening asthma attacks that the doctors back then just had no idea how to cure.
But here's the thing about Roosevelt. He refused to be defined by his weaknesses. Instead, he basically declared war on his own body, embracing what he famously called the strenuous life. He pushed himself through a relentless regimen of exercise, boxing at Harvard, and then really testing himself with the hard, rugged life of a cattle rancher out in the Dakota Territory. And this just shows you the incredible result of that transformation. I mean, he literally remade himself. He went from this bookish, frail student to the iconic war hero of the Spanish-American War, the guy leading that legendary charge up San Juan Hill.
And that same personal fight for strength? Well, it translated directly into his presidency as a political fight for fairness, a promise he called the square deal for every single American.
So, what was the square deal exactly? Well, you have to understand, at the time, this was a revolutionary idea. For decades, the government had mostly stayed out of the economy. But Roosevelt came in and argued that the federal government had to step in to balance the interests of average citizens, labor unions, and the massive corporations. And he didn't wait around to put this into practice. In 1902, a huge coal strike threatened a national energy crisis. Now, any president before him would have just sided with the powerful mine owners. Not Roosevelt. He actually intervened and forced both sides to the negotiating table. That was a completely unprecedented move for the White House.
Now, think about how he tackled those giant corporate monopolies. He earned the nickname Trust Buster for a reason. He used the Sherman Antitrust Act to go after 44 of them. To give you some perspective, his 3 predecessors, they'd only brought 18 cases combined.
He also listened when the public was angry. After Upton Sinclair's novel The Jungle exposed the absolutely horrific conditions in the meatpacking industry, Roosevelt didn't just shrug. He pushed, and he pushed, championing landmark laws that gave us the foundation for the FDA, protecting all of us from unsafe food and medicine.
Okay, but here's where things get really fascinating. One of the biggest contradictions of Roosevelt's life lies in his relationship with the natural world. I mean, how could the same man be both its greatest hunter and its greatest protector?
Roosevelt's passion for nature was absolutely deep and lifelong. This is a guy who started his own natural history museum when he was just a kid. He was a published expert on birds while he was still at Harvard. And after his presidency, he led a massive expedition to Africa to collect thousands of animal specimens for the Smithsonian. And yet, this exact same big game hunter became America's greatest conservationist president. It's not even close. He used his executive power to protect a staggering 230 million acres of land. Think about that. He established national parks, national forests, and the very first federal bird reserves.
So, how did he square this circle? Well, in his mind, there was no conflict at all. He argued his hunting wasn't just for sport, it was for science. He was collecting specimens, preserving them for the very museums that would educate future generations about the natural world he loved.
Now that same bold, sometimes aggressive approach, he took it right into his foreign policy. This is where he dramatically expanded America's influence on the world stage and where he truly put that big stick philosophy into practice.
I mean, look at this list. He brokered peace between Russia and Japan, and even won a Nobel Prize for it. He flexed America's military muscle by sending the entire Great White Fleet on a global tour. And, of course, he started one of the world's most ambitious projects ever, the Panama Canal, after, supporting a revolution to make it happen.
But that Nobel Prize win, it caused a huge controversy at the time. While some people were celebrating him, critics in Europe were calling him a military-mad imperialist. It just perfectly highlights this dual reputation he had. On one side, a peacemaker, and on the other, a nation builder who is not afraid to use force.
So, how in the world do we make sense of all these competing identities? The trustbuster, the conservationist, the Nobel laureate, the imperialist. Well, that brings us to his incredibly complex legacy.
If you look at the ledger, on one side, he was absolutely a progressive champion who fought for the common person against these incredibly powerful interests. But on the other side, he was an unapologetic nationalist who believed it was America's right to expand its influence and exercise, as he put it, international police power.
So in the end, no single label can really contain Theodore Roosevelt. He was all of these things, and often he was all of them at the exact same time. He was just this multitude of identities packed into one larger-than-life person.
And that really leaves us with a final question to chew on. When we look up at that famous monument, that face carved into the mountains of South Dakota, which face of this multifaceted, contradictory, and utterly compelling man are we truly memorializing?